damage uh, are different across different varieties. Some varieties have very heavy damage, show very heavy infestation, while others show a very light infestation and light damage. Like I said, chlorotic leaf spot that progresses into a brown necrotic spot tissue eventually leads to the leaf dropping off. And because the leaves fall off of the trees, it either doesn't fruit or it drops the fruit. So you typically don't have good yield from those trees. The average life cycle of these bugs are typically 3 weeks from hatching out of the egg to becoming an adult and being able to lay the egg again. So in Hawaii, we have multiple generations in 1 year. Eggs are laid typically in those loose rolls. You can see them in the upper picture, some of those dots. I have some pictures forward to, and they create this tar-like secretion. You can see these little bubbles typically hold the eggs. And then their next stage would be this nymphal stage, shown here, these 3 nymphs, followed by the adult stage at the top. So yeah, this picture down below shows some of the egg clusters as well as the other nymphs and other stages. So for our project, we have to come up with a rating scale or a way to kind of quantify the damage of the tree. So I'm just presenting our rating scale. So 1 would be an equivalent healthy tree. So that'll have no damage, no infestation. All the leaves are unaffected. Stage 2 or scale 2, you might see a little bit of initial adult populations forming, not a lot of eggs yet at this stage. Scale 3, you'll see establishment of the population on your trees, about 20% to 30% damage. Scale 4 is moving into 50% to 60% damage. And then scale 5 is basically completely, the tree is complete, like 80% to completely damaged. And in some of these cases, there's no foliage at all in the trees. So in 2001, I think there's a lot of growers as well as homeowners calling the office to figure out what's going on with their trees and how to control it. So there wasn't a lot of data, I think, at the time as far as efficacy of insecticides to control the pests. So I took it upon myself with help from Dr. Kunhui Wang and her lab, as well as Dr. Amjad Ahmad, to figure out what products work best. So we evaluate a series of insecticides for the efficacy against this lace bug, both organic and conventional products, to figure out what worked and how we could put these products into a rotational program so that we don't develop resistance to any of these products, as well as making it safe for both the beneficial insects that are available, as well as pollinators that are helping to help set the fruit. So our trial took place at the Pomoho Research Station in our avocado collection. We have about 36 established plants. I believe they're about 6 years old and are producing fruit. So some of the information for how the trial was conducted, we selected 11 insecticides as well as an untreated check that we thought were going to be effective against controlling this type of insect. It started in January and basically went until March. We had 3 replicates per treatment or per product. We sprayed each product about 2-week intervals, and we used about 220 gallons per acre rate with a surfactant called Kinetic, which is a penetrant. And then we used a steel SR450 mist blower. You can see an example of what that looks like in the bottom left corner. And then basically what we did, so these are the 11 products that we selected. The asterisks next to the names represent organic products. And we had 1 restricted use product, which would be the Mustang. Everything else were conventional products not available for organic production. And we basically used the highest label rate allowed for avocado. So this graph just represents on a visual scale what the trees look like after application. So after each application, the lab went out and helped collect visual scale ratings, I guess, of trees and how they developed or how they progressed over time. So here you can see how trees pretty much stayed the same that were treated with the insecticides. I think this graph shows a better representation of kind of what was happening. So this graph represents the percent
Join the meeting.
bugs dead after application. Each dot represents a 5-leaf sample per tree per replication on each of these dates. So basically what this shows is pretty much all the products were effective at killing the insects. Some products were a lot better than others, but everything pretty much worked better than the control. So this orange line at the bottom is the untreated control, which showed little to no death. And then everything else was at least 40 to 50% or better. So this shows that the products selected in our trial did work at some level, so that it would reduce the population if you had it there on your trees. But from our I guess our evaluation, there were 4 products that stood out. It was the Admire Pro. This was used as a foliar application. Ecotech, which was one of the organic products, showed really good control during our trial. Mustang was that synthetic pyrethroid, which is a restricted product. And then Sivantal Prime is a non-restricted product, which is a systemic product similar to Admire Pro. So these 4 products showed the best control, followed by malathion, but pretty much everything else showed at least 70% kill throughout the trial. So these numbers represent our average of all of the data collected throughout the period of treatment. Because we found products that were effective and somewhat effective, we decided to take this trial further and evaluate a rotational program so that we're not spraying the same insecticides over and over again. That's an important component to your IPM program for that chemical portion of an IPM program. So for this second objective, we looked into how we could use that rotation. And this chart basically shows shows what we selected and when we selected to use it throughout the year. So we came up with this rotational program based on the products that showed the most efficacy. And we put it to the test for a good, I believe it was a 5-month period. So the second trial, basically from April to September 2021 at the same avocado orchard, we foliar sprayed with either a 2-week or 4-week rotational period, depending on the product. We selected the conventional treatments, which also included some organic products. Since Ecotech seemed to be a good product overall, as far as that initial trial, we selected to put it into our conventional rotation. And then our organic rotation was all certified, OMRI certified products that you could use for a certified organic farmer. And then we also had that untreated control, which didn't receive any treatment. And then for this, we selected 10 plants per treatment, and then sprayed them as described in our trial 1 with the mist blower. And then we took data every 2 weeks. So this is just showing it as a damage rating scale. So for the most part, this black line at the bottom is that chemical treatment rotation, and it showed to be in that 1 scale rating, whereas both the organic treatment and the control, which wasn't receiving any products, were basically the same at about a 3 to 4 scale rating. So the damage was a lot heavier with both the organic and the control versus the conventional chemical treatments. If you look at this chart, this is showing the events of application and the individual sampling and the percent insect dead at the time. So for the most part, like we said, that Admire Pro works really well as a foliar application. You see this initial control, basically 100% kill at the time, and then they stay dead for a longer period compared to other products. Sivanto was also a really good product. So at this point here, in September, we sprayed Sivanto. We had about 80 to 85% kill at that time. The malathion also helped to maintain that almost 100% kill at the time. And then Danitol, which is similar to Mustang, it's another synthetic pyrethroid, also showed that good kill to about 100%. So the other products we put in was Ecotech, and it didn't seem to do as well as we saw in our first trial. So the data for that product is kind of mixed, and we're not sure why it showed less control in this round versus the first time. And then we included a new product at this time called Pure Crop 1, which is a product recommended by one of the chemical companies to test out. And it didn't seem to do too much during that time. If anything, it dropped, as you can see here, to basically the same as the organic treatments. If you look at the organic control, it was still better than the control, but not as good as the conventional treatments. So we first sprayed 2 applications of Multi-X, followed by Ecotech, which also showed low control in the organic treatments. We had a spike with Pyganic. So Pyganic seems to be one of the more promising products for the organic growers, but it is a pyrethroid. So continuous use of that product could lead to resistance. So you can't keep spraying this Pyganic product. And then we included the Pure Crop 1, which was basically the same as the conventional. For the larger growers, this is probably going to be another class, but I've kind of developed this modified mist blower that we can talk about later in a future class. So for the larger growers, a backpack mist blower can typically hold up to 4 gallons of water. So you can't spray a lot of trees with that type of load. You're going to have to keep filling up the container. So this modification basically just allows you to increase your range and the amount of trees you can spray on 1 tank load before having to go back and refill. The reason for selecting this type of spray application is because it has better coverage on the tree versus other spray applications. It helps to atomize the liquid coming out of the sprayer, which helps with coating the leaf completely. And because most of these insecticides are contact insecticides, meaning they have to actually touch the insect itself or be on the leaf for the insect to actually feed on or walk over, this type of sprayer helps with getting that product onto the leaf surface completely without having to use so much liquid. Oh, sorry, the video was supposed to play. So for those of you that don't know what a mist blower does, it basically shoots out liquid with air pressure. So this is basically a leaf blower that's atomizing the liquid into the air so that it can basically cover the leaf surface. And by attaching it to a larger tank, we have more range to cover. Moving on from that trial, I was curious because spray application is not necessarily something that most people can do or want to do. So Admire Pro and some of the other imidacloprid products, I believe, have a soil drench application for avocados. There is a homeowner product as well. I think there are some of you are homeowners. So there is a, I believe, citrus and fruit tree product from the Bayer Advanced line of insecticides. And I believe their avocado label rate suggests a soil drench application. So because of that, I wanted to see the efficacy. And this is on just as a single tree application, just as an observational trial. So the tree, this particular tree, I think the variety is called Mirashige or Yamagata, I believe. And it basically looks like the tree on the left all year long. If we don't treat it, it has typically no leaves all year long. It does flush when it's supposed to, and then immediately gets infested, and then all the leaves drop off. So it hasn't really had any fruit over the last 3 to 4 years now. So what I did is I took the rate of recommended on the Admire label, and which was 15 or 14 fluid ounces per acre rate. I scaled that down to a tree canopy rate, so about 10 by 10 area I use as my area. And then I basically ran the irrigation on this tree and injected the Admire into this tree. And you can see the progression over the 5-month period. So it was treated in October. In November, the leaves started to flush out again on this tree. By January, which is about 3 months later, the leaves are still on the tree. And then you can see 5 months later, it's still on the tree. So the Admire Pro has a longer half-life, I guess, in the soil versus on the leaf surface. So by injecting the imidacloprid into the soil, you can have this extended control for a longer period of time. And we've seen it, or at least I've seen it on this one tree out to about 5 months before. At this point, you'll start to see infestation moving into the leaf. And then at the bottom, you can see, I believe this is from Oregon State University's Pesticide Information Center. I think their information suggests that the half-life is about 40 to 124 days in the soil. So that's about, if you have a high organic soil, it'll be longer. If you have a lower organic matter soil, it'll be shorter. But that would be the period for existing in the soil where the plant can take it up into the leaves for the control of the lace bug. And it's very important to note when you're using products like Admire, which has a moderate to high toxicity to bees and other pollinators, you don't want to use this during flowering. So the reason why I did it in October is typically avocado, I think fruits or flowers in May, March to May, depending on the variety. So I wanted to make sure that the product was no longer effective out to that point, to make sure I'm not hindering or affecting any of the bee pollinators in the area. But like every other IPM program, there's also cultural controls. So one of the most important parts is to make sure your trees are healthy. So providing adequate fertilizer, irrigation if it needs, making sure you're staying on top of pruning so that you can actually reach the trees for insecticide application, and then allow for basically having the healthy trees allows the tree to recover after the damage from the pest. And then there are some differences in severity of damage across varieties. And from what I've noticed, some of those resistance or tolerances might differ across geographic locations. So a variety that does well in, say, Pomoho on Oahu might not do as well on the Big Island. So I think that's where future research has to go, is to figure out what varieties do well where, and then make that information available to the public so that they can do or select varieties that are more adapted to the pests in their location. So that's something that I've been interested in looking into as far as documenting how well varieties do in certain areas. And for us at Pomo, I think San Miguel seems to be the most tolerant to the damage without any application of insecticides. To be honest, I think application of insecticides might be cost prohibitive for commercial farmers because of the labor required to do it so frequently. The bottom line might be affected greatly if you're having to spray every 2 weeks to every 4 weeks, especially for a crop that's harvested very short period over the course of the year. And then biocontrols are the other potential portion of the IPM program. As far as I know, and as far as the research I've read, most of them are general lacebug predators. Lacewings, lady beetles, the spiders are commonly found here in Hawaii, but from the information I've seen, they're not very effective at controlling the lacebug itself. You might see them in the area and they might be doing some damage to the lace bug, but all the research I've seen is that they don't show that they're too effective at basically eliminating the population. And I'm not exactly sure if it's documented if we have the predatory thrips and the predaceous mites here in Hawaii that are showing promise elsewhere. I think Florida has a species that has been doing pretty good at minimizing the damage. But those are all future works that I think are being looked into currently, and hopefully we have more information to share with you. But for the most part, I'm just going to summarize kind of everything. Because we're dealing with pesticides, you want to make sure you follow all those label rates, the REI, PHI, registered crops, and all the other information on those pesticide labels, because they are the law. And like I mentioned, minimizing application of any of these pesticides during bloom, especially for if honeybees are foraging. And then typically in an IPM program, we recommend using softer contact insecticides such as the Impede, the Microtrol, Pyganic, Ecotech to start off. And if you have to go to a stronger product, and then bear in mind these life cycles are about 3 weeks. So you're going to have to continuously spray products because there's always multiple stages on the plant. So most of these products, because they're contact insecticides, you may kill the adults and the nymphs, but you won't penetrate that tar covered egg. So once they hatch, you're going to have to come back and spray them again before they can lay future eggs. And then products like imidacloprid and malathion are very effective, but you can't spray them weekly because there's a maximum amount of applications. I believe Admire is 6 or 4 foliarly, and then once as a soil drench. So making sure you understand that in your application program, because you only have a few applications a year, and this is a all year long perennial crop. So you're going to have to figure out what you can use for the rest of the year. And that's why we had to come up with this spray rotational program if you do decide to use insecticides. And then we recommend avoiding that broad spectrum insecticides like the carbamates or the pyrethroids like the Mustang or the Danatol and the malathion, just because they kill everything and they're not specific to just the ALB or the lace bug. And then when you're using your chemicals, you want to make sure you're starting early at the onset of infestation so that they don't spread to the rest of your tree. So once the damage happens to the leaf, you can't recover from that damage, right? So preventing the damage is very important, and having the most amount of leaves on your tree helps with the fruit set, as well as making sure the fruits stay on all the way out to harvest. And I'd like to thank Kunhui's lab and the members in her lab, as well as Dr. Ahmad, for helping us fund some of this research that we've presented today. And then I can answer any questions.
Well, thank you so much. We have actually some list of questions starting with
Sorry, I'm judging. Mike is breaking up.
Oh, my microphone. Sorry about that.
I'm trying to scroll through the chat. There's a lot of things in here.
Yeah.
I think the first question is from Nancy. Where did the lace bug probably come from? That's a good question. I don't know that answer. It probably came in from a plant that got imported into Hawaii from some location. I don't exactly know where. It was identified on Oahu first, I believe, but doesn't mean that it was originally brought in here. It could have been brought in from a nursery from another island as well. So I don't think that information has been identified.
Another question is about the EIQ rates available for these products, the one you mentioned.
What is the EIQ?
It was from Alicia. Alicia, what do you mean by that, please?
Environmental impact quotient. When sorry, it's basically a number that that references like how toxic something is to the environment in general. So like, something with a low EIQ would be okay, but like if you have to apply it 5 or 6 times throughout the season, it's maybe better to just hit it once with like, a systemic or something like that. I was just kind of curious.
That's a good question. I don't have those answers. So when I looked up the Admire Pro information, it was from that NCPIP, NPIC from Oregon State. So that National Pesticide Information has the breakdown of each active ingredient. So it tells you half-life, it tells you the LD50s, how toxic it is to mammals, invertebrates, and all of that information by active ingredient. So if you wanted to, you could look through that list and determine for yourself. But I don't know. I've never worked with EIQs. So I don't have that information. Sorry.
Yeah, the Oregon folks is probably exactly who I need to look for.
Yeah.
So thanks.
Thank you. Jensen, the other question was about the chemicals were organic. I did answer it in the chat. Yes, it like a list of organic and conventional insecticides, correct?
Yep. So on the organic or the insecticide list, I showed that chart. If it had an asterisk, it's an Omri approved organic product. If it didn't have an asterisk, it was a conventional product.
Thank you. There was a question from Paulo about future events. Well, we usually, when we have events, we usually post them through the county listserv, and also we post them on Eventbrite. It depends, sometime in person or virtual. That really depends. So just keep an eye for that. Thank you.
I think Shannon had the question, how was yield on the control tree? Did it still produce with no treatment? So for all of these insecticide trials that I've conducted, it wasn't necessarily looking at yield, it was just looking at whether or not the products controlled the insect itself. Like I said, some varieties can still yield without insecticide control and others won't yield at all because of, it's basically the amount of leaf that the tree can hold on. If it can hold on to enough leaves to set fruit and hold on to the fruit, then it'll continue to fruit without having to be sprayed by any insecticides. But there are varieties that, like that Yamagata I showed, basically they don't hold on to any fruit. And it basically never flowers because there's not enough energy to even push flowers out. It's basically just trying to keep itself alive. Steve says, is Admire spray or systemic application more effective? So it depends on what you're trying to achieve for that product. The spray, like I said, has more applications per year, but the efficacy length is shorter. It might be a week, it might be 2 weeks if foliar applied, versus a soil drench might be up to 5 months of control. But if you're looking at the tree, you need 12 months of control. So if you can either go the route of taking 5 months of control and finding another product to finish off the rest of the year, or you can use it as a foliar product and stick it into certain months to make sure that there's leaves on your tree at certain months. But when you're using it, you have to make sure you're not putting on during any flowering period. So in my opinion, if you have the ability to spray, you have more months you can use the product in across the year. And then, so my idea is you put a strong product with a weak product. So the strong product keeps the tree healthy for a period. You put a weak product in, the population builds up. Then you put a strong product back in, and that brings the population back down. So you can maintain a minimal amount of damage, versus if you use the strong product up front and you have only weak products, you might not have the tree survive the rest of the year. And I don't have that information, but that would be my suggestion. If you can spray, you have more applications of that product. But if not, it can be safer to apply it as a soil drench, because you're not having to spray it onto the tree. You can just put it right down into the soil. So it's more of a user choice than efficacy, because they work both equally well. Hope that answers the question. Just to clarify, is that going from October 21 to March 2022? Yes. So that if this is talking about the soil drench application on that one tree, then it was from October to March 21 to 22. How long does Admire stay in the tree? That's a good question, and I was trying to look up more of that information from that Oregon State website, and it's not very clear on the length of time. There's so many factors that determine how long that product can stay in the tree, especially if you're soil drenching it. It can be anywhere from that 40 days to 128 days. So I don't really have a good answer for you on that one. Cool. Yeah, neem oil. It doesn't seem to work. Everybody I've heard that has used it has not had good results with neem oil. So it wasn't even included into our trial. We did use azadirachtin, which is a synthetic version of the neem oil. And that showed some promise. That was one of the products used in the trial. I think MoltX is the name of the product that we use for this trial. I think USDA ARS in Hilo has also done trials with Azera. I think Azera was the product they use, and that's also azadirachtin product, and they were getting about 50 to 60% control, similar to what we've seen in our trees. So it's not nothing, but you do get reduction in population. How do you inject Admire Pro as a soil drench? So there's multiple ways you can do it. If it's one tree in your backyard, you can just turn the hose on and water the soil and pour the product into the soil and let it water in. The idea is you want to get the product moving through the soil profile down to a little bit deeper where the feeder roots are. So what I did was I irrigated the canopy ring of the tree, so that the drip line of the tree, I irrigated that portion of the tree, and I allowed the product to move. So I diluted the product in water and I poured it along the ring of the drip line, and I irrigated that drip line with the irrigation system. And that's how I injected it. And I ran the irrigation for about 30 minutes to make sure I moved that product into the soil surface, or beneath the soil surface, I should say. For conventional grower or commercial growers, there are injection systems that you can use, and there are requirements for using an injection system. Nancy, yes, there are researchers talking about biocontrol, and we do have a current project looking at the lacewing, the green and brown lacewing, to see if we can bring more of them into avocado fields and whether or not they're doing anything. So one of the commercial growers I work with, we're setting up, I guess, insectary plantings. Insectary plantings are plants you purposely plant to attract beneficial insects. So I think sweet alyssum was one of them. And I'd have to look at the list. There's a whole bunch of different ones, dill, fennel, all these plants bring in beneficial insects. And because they're not specific to avocado lacebug, we're basically just hoping to bring them in. So the population is so high that there's not enough food for them that they go for the avocado lacebug. I think that's kind of the current. As far as bringing in outside biocontrols, I don't know if anybody's working on that. That's not something I've been looking into, so I'm not sure.
Wrangler versus Admire Pro, Jensen.
Sorry, what?
A question about Wrangler versus Admire Pro. Are they the same?
So they're the same active ingredient, but you'd have to look at the label to make sure avocado is listed on that label. And it might have a different application. It might not have soil versus foliar. So I don't know. I haven't looked at the Wrangler label for avocado. I just had Admire Pro in our chemical storage. So I selected Admire Pro as the product. I'm not saying that Wrangler won't work, but if you have it, I would look at the label because it's the same exact active ingredient.
It's just it's more concentrated in the Admire Pro.
Yeah, so the rate might be higher for the Wrangler. I'm not sure. I haven't looked at the label. There was a verbal question, I think.
Are soil drenches safe to use during fruiting or flowering or fruiting?
So for the Admire Pro, it's not safe for the flowering. I guess for fruiting, it's my understanding it doesn't translocate to the fruit. But I'm not a that kind of scientist, so I can't tell you the chemical reaction going on in the fruit. That's just what I've read and what I've been told is that if you are injecting during fruit set, then it's not likely to move within the fruit, but I don't know that for a fact. And it's not legal to apply it during flowering, so I wouldn't put it down, inject it while flowering, just because as bees pollinate, they can potentially take up the product from the flower. So you don't want to be doing it when there's flowers on the tree.
Okay, thank you. Will you be making the slides available?
I'll probably send the PDF to Amjad so he can send it to the registration list.
Thank you.
That was your question. I'm looking at your question right now.
Are you planning to do more trials and potentially incorporate some of the other suggestions we've seen here, especially for home growers like neem or soaps or KNF OHN formulas?
I've worked with soap. Soap is on the list as MP'd. That's a commercial soap product, and it had that 40 to 60% control. I'm probably not going to look into more homeowner products just because I'm a commercial extension agent. I think I saw Tina's name on the list. She works more with the urban garden or master gardener program that might have more recommendations in the future if she chooses to look into that. But typically I don't work with home garden products, so I don't necessarily know. If there's an equivalent commercial product, I probably work with it. And I think if there's more products available or people seeing results from it, I would be more than welcome to look into quantifying the efficacy of the product. But I think for the most part, I looked at pretty much all of the registered products on avocado in this list that I thought would be effective.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm seeing spreading to other species as well, unfortunately. So I suspect if you're doing this, you'll be quite busy over the next couple of years.
Yeah, there's other secondary hosts of the insect.
Yes, there are, unfortunately.
Hi, Jensen, this is Una. I wanted to ask a question.
Hey, what's up?
I wrote it on there. I didn't think you covered it. The surround, the clay stuff that was quite effective for CBB for a lot of people. Have you tried that?
I have not tried that, and that could be a potential product that we look at. Yeah, I just haven't had a chance to look into it.
Okay.
I was looking more at the other products, but yeah, it probably has potential. I'm not sure if it has a long-term effect, but that's a potential product that we could look into.
It does stay on the plant a long time.
Yeah, I know it does, especially if you use a good spreader sticker.
Yeah. And what about garlic? Because a lot of people were doing the clay and the garlic together, and they found that to be pretty gnarly.
Yeah, I haven't used garlic. And garlic is one of my passion projects right now, so I don't want to waste my garlic on avocado.
Right, but you can buy garlic berry, or you can just buy garlic.
Yeah.
Right?
I haven't worked with it, but some of the essential oils like the Ecotech at that point when we tried it seemed to show pretty good control. But now that we've done it multiple times, I think the control varies throughout the year, and there might be a environmental factor that increases or decreases efficacy, and I don't have that quantified right now.
Ken Love was mentioning that darker leaves possibly have more anise in them, and that makes them more repellent. Have you heard that?
I haven't heard that, but that's interesting.
Because on our farm, one of the trees that has really dark leaves had a beautiful crop, and the lighter colored leaves did not.
Interesting.
So
I mean, that's
anyway,
something that we could potentially look into, is increasing nutrient densities, I guess, of certain nutrients to increase darkness of the leaf, or even quantifying varieties that have darker leaves in general.
okay, thanks.
Thanks. I think we're at the height of the tree I drenched, I think it was about 12 feet tall and about 10 to 12 feet in diameter. I think if Admire Pro is not available, it's probably because there's a distribution shortage. But there are other imidacloprid products like the Wrangler. I just don't know if they're allowed for use on avocado. Can you spray organics during flowering? Some of the organics are non-specific, so they're more contact insecticides. So if you're spraying them during flowering and there are bees and other pollinators and other beneficials flying around, you're likely to kill them as well. So during flowering, I would suggest not using non-specific insecticides, like the organics that don't necessarily kill certain things. Most of these products have a form for home gardeners. Like I said, the imidacloprid product, the Admire Pro, has an equivalent from Bayer called I think citrus and fruit tree. Then pretty much all of the organic products I sprayed has an equivalent for home garden use. Yep, that's the home garden soil drench application. Soil drench is once a year for Admire. Malathion, I don't believe I know off the top of my head the amount of applications you have per year. But each label has the amount of applications per year and how frequent you can use it. So typically it's at least 7 to 10 day intervals. And a lot of times it specifies don't use the product after 2 applications consecutively, just because of the resistance management practices. Wow, there's a lot of questions. Admire Pro, for example, you are recommending mist spray October, February to maintain after the spring bloom time. Basically, I'm recommending once the flush comes out, you spray your trees with something if you're going to spray. Especially as soon as you start to see the damage, that's typically when I would recommend you start spraying. And then continue that as long as you can justify doing that, because that'll keep the population to a minimum. I would love to come to Pahoa and see your 600 trees and do some research. So those 100-year-old trees, that's why I mentioned earlier, or as part of the cultural practices, is to prune properly. So instead of letting trees get 100 and so feet tall, you want to keep them to a reachable height. So most spray applications can only reach up to 20 feet to 25 feet tall. So that's probably the height you want to keep your trees at. And some of these older trees can handle a severe pruning. So you can prune them back severely. Maybe you can, without totally killing them off and then sacrificing a year or 2 to get them back up and going. But yes, there's only one soil drench product that I know of that is effective. Thanks, Emily, for putting that EIQ calculator in there. Uh, any safe products relative be safe? I don't know if any of the products are safe for bees. For the most part, they're pretty general products, so they'll kill whatever they contact.
I was
Yeah,
just asking because I was thinking maybe there was some sort of biological control, like, it was kind of a hope and not a real strong.
I think even the biological chemical controls also will colonize the bees. So the Bavaria, I think, will actually colonize bees too if you spray it on them. So Bavaria bassiana, I think the product I used was Microtrol. Um, it's one of those products working pretty well for coffee for the berry borer. So we selected that as one of the products, and it did okay. But yeah, I think if you do spray the bees with it, it'll colonize the bees as well. And I don't know how severe the damage will be, but yeah.
Maybe just don't.
Yeah. So I mean, typically bees forage certain times of the day. So when you're spraying, if you are spraying when the flowers are out, you want to spray during those, I guess, hotter periods of the day when they're not flying around. If there are periods, I see them all day long. So you may affect a few no matter what.
Thanks.
The black on the bottom sides of the leaf. So mostly those are eggs surrounded by like a resin type product. So when you spray these insecticides, you can't kill the eggs typically because they're covered by it. And there's also feces on the bottom of those leaves as well. I just got to your question about the surround. That's something we can look into. Yep. Some growers I've seen have 6 months of control too. So I think the Admire is one of the more recommended as a soil drench is one of the more recommended ways just because of the length of efficacy, and then they don't have to go back in and continuously spray. I don't think there are any organic drenches that I know of. I think there are some that are marketed, but looking at the type of product they are, I don't see it likely that it's going to move through the plant up into the foliage where you need it to go. If anything, they're helping the plant get healthier so that it can kind of combat the damage, but it's not going to eliminate them altogether. KNF, I don't necessarily work with KNF, so I don't know how to make them. Kun Hui Wang, who's the collaborator on this research, she works kind of a lot with KNF, and that's something we could potentially look into. Marigolds won't be a repellent, but they are one of those insectary plants that can potentially bring in beneficial insects that can predate on those avocado lace bugs. I believe some of these products are insect growth regulators, and they're somewhat effective. I can't list the secondary hosts off the top of my head right now, but I can probably work with Amjad to make sure that you get it, Carrie. Yeah, avocado lacebug research is underway all over the world. It's a big problem in California, Florida. I think UC Davis is doing a lot of work in biocontrol research. And I think they're currently figuring out if the wasp from Florida is detrimental to anything else in their area before importing it into California from Florida. But I believe some of the research I saw showed that Florida's species of wasp that they have is doing a decent job at controlling naturally. I don't think there are any researchers at CTAR advising policymakers at this point for avocado. I've definitely asked for a lot of funding and not received any funding. So, except for from Amjad. Thank you, Amjad. But hopefully, we can get more money to look into a lot of these problems related to avocado. I think Impede and Ecotech are decent products to rotate out. If you can add in the Pyganic as well, that's seems to be a little bit stronger organic product. Thank you, Kathy, for looking that up about Wrangler being allowed on avocado. If Una, if you have the recipe, Bethany is looking for the clay and garlic recipe. What can be used for very large trees that cannot be sprayed? I don't know if injection will work for really large trees. I don't know if the product can move that far from the soil through the tree up into the canopy of larger trees. I know for a fact it works with moderately tall trees, so that 10 to 15 feet tall tree seems to be really good. But when it gets into that 100-year-old tree that's 100 feet tall, I don't know if the product is going to move effectively through the plant, and whether or not you're going to see control on the foliage. That information I don't know. That's why I'm recommending that you manage your trees appropriately to keep them at that smaller level so that products work more efficiently. Is any research being done on proper mineral and nutrient balancing for resistance to ALB? I don't think anybody has looked into crop nutrient management as a strategy for controlling ALB. It's just been a general blanket statement to keep the trees healthy so that they can recover from the damage. I think the fact that Una brought up with the greenness of the leaf is something that we could look into to see if we can manage nutrients effectively to increase darkness of the leaf if it does produce a chemical that can resist the ALB. That's something that's we can look into. I don't know if there's any companion plants that will pull it off of the avocado tree because avocado is its primary host, so it's going to prefer to be on the avocado than other trees. And I just see I need to wrap it up. So I'm quickly scrolling. I think we've covered all the questions, Amjad. I hope we covered it all. So I want to give Emily some time to do her section.
Thank you very much, Jensen. Awesome work. Thank you. Everybody, thank you very much for the questions. We will be, so this present here is recorded and we are going to have also the slides available for you guys. And now we need to give the time for Emily to present. Emily, are you ready?
Sure. Yeah. And thank you,
Please go ahead.
Amjad, and thank you, Jensen, so much.
Thank you.
Can you hear me okay?
Very good, clearly. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, thank you, everyone. So the focus of tonight was really about the avocado lace bug. So it's great. We wanted Jensen to go first to give you that kind of nitty gritty and some of the research updates specific to avocado. And then I wanted to share a bit of an IPM framework, that's the integrated pest management, and we can keep referring back to the avocado and dig into some further questions. So Jensen, I welcome you to jump in as more questions might come up throughout the presentation. Let's see, I'll get the screen going here. Alrighty, can you see the presentation all right? Yep, perfect. So for folks who might not be familiar, talking about integrated pest management or IPM. So it's really a framework of a way we can think about decision making when we're looking at managing pests in our garden or on our farm. So starting off just real quick, what is a pest? Often we might see things on our plants and we want to make sure that we know what we're looking at, whether it's a beneficial insect, in some cases a pollinator, something that's neutral, or something that's actually doing damage. So the pests are organisms that damage or interfere with our activities. They impact human or animal health, transmit disease, or maybe just a nuisance. And so integrated pest management, this is a sustainable approach to managing pests by combining the use of all practical methods of control. So that includes things like cultural, physical, biological, and chemical methods, and we'll go into each in a little more detail. And then also making sure that we're meeting our goals, including minimizing economic, health, and environmental risks in the process. So this is a system based on ecology, so it requires a lot of knowledge on the part of the producer, the gardener or farmer, to understand population dynamics, things like predator-prey relations, the food webs, and the phenology, which are the relations between climate or periodic biological phenomena. Everything is connected. So some of what we discussed with avocado, right, about thinking about timing of flowering, timing of leaf flushes, when you might want to spray or do those other interventions. And so why IPM? Looking back, there was an era of traditional approaches up until about 1938, which are really what we might think of as natural or traditional management. And then starting in 1939, World War II, and through about the early 60s, we really entered the era of pesticides. So this is that better living through chemistry, and there's an old commercial down here on the left, DDT is good for me. But then coming into the 1960s, we saw with the publication of Silent Spring, for example, some of those broader ecological impacts from the heavy use of pesticides, which shifted into this era now of integrated pest management, and maybe thinking about new approaches that might come out in the future as well. I wanted to share this idea of a pesticide treadmill, just to keep in mind when we're looking at using chemical pesticides. And again, this relates a lot to what Jensen was talking about, the importance of rotating the different chemicals that you are using, if that's a tool that you're going to be incorporating, whether organic or conventional, because it can happen, you get on this treadmill where, when you're on the treadmill, you start going and then eventually you start moving faster and faster. And what you find is that over time, you might need to use more frequent sprays, larger quantities, or more stronger chemicals, because in some cases you have things like pesticide resistance that accumulates if you're using the same chemical or the same mode of action over time. Pest rebound in some cases. So this is where you apply a spray, and because the spray is not non-specific and or broadly acting, and it knocks down a lot of the natural enemies, it creates an imbalance, and you might see even more pests after the spray than before it. Or a secondary pest outbreak, where the spray, again, by causing an imbalance, by knocking out the natural enemies, you have something else that maybe wasn't a pest before becomes a problem. So just a quick summary on how pesticide resistance occurs. We have an example here on the upper left, the first generation before the pesticide application. And in this case, the red represents the individual in that population that has a natural resistance to whatever you're spraying. So you come in and you spray your pesticide, and then you see that you have maybe just a couple individuals that are still susceptible, and that one that's resistant survives to pass on its genetics. So in the next generation, again, you see an even greater proportion of the population have those resistant genetics. Spray again, the weak ones die, and after time, you end up with a population that's almost entirely resistant individuals. So we're basically just speeding up natural selection pressure for that resistance. And this is just to show the tremendous rise in resistance. Of course, before the use of many pesticides, we wouldn't see much resistance, but starting in the mid 50s and onward, this accumulation of both weeds, that's the lower dark line, and then arthropods, such as insects and mites, that are resistant. This is a cumulative total. Secondary pest, just a quick example. This is kind of a famous one from Washington State. They grow a lot of apples and pears, where there was a problem with codling moth, and they treated for that, and that knocked back the natural predators, natural enemies, and pear psylla caused a secondary outbreak of pear psylla, and then treating for that caused an outbreak of spider mites. And we see in about a third of the most damaging insects in the US were originally secondary pests and only became problems after the use of pesticides. So some key steps in IPM. The first thing is to make sure that you're correctly identifying the crop damage and responsible pests. So, right, again, in the case of the avocado lacebug, you're seeing some brown spots on the leaves. You want to make sure that it is in fact due to the lacebug and not to something else, salt burn or a nutrient imbalance or something else that might be causing the defoliation. So we want to be a good detective, and these are just some examples. If you're seeing damage on the leaf, you can match that up to the various causes. So in many cases, that we're looking at insect pests, for example, and the different types of mouth parts that they have will cause different types of damage based on their feeding. So looking at those patterns, and again, ALB, pretty easy to identify. Just a reminder, want to make sure when we're thinking about pests, we're thinking about things that might be at or below the soil surface, as well as in the canopy. And also including vertebrate and invertebrate pests in our assessments. So the next step is to think about the life cycle, to understand what their life cycle and their biology is. So just to recap, this is a diamondback moth example, but Jensen had mentioned that it's a 3-week life cycle. So thinking about how many days it takes to go from eggs to nymphs to the adults who are mature and are laying eggs again, and how that might impact our management decisions. And then establish an action threshold. So thinking about the example of the rating system that Jensen had created for doing his research, but also thinking about for yourself, what is going to trigger that kind of action, meaning that treatment intervention. And that might be based on an economic injury level. So this is going to look really different for a home gardener that has a couple of trees, which is primarily for family and friends, versus a commercial grower with a large orchard operation, and that's their primary livelihood. So this is a way to see, what level of pest damage, maybe that's what level of defoliation, for example, is going to reduce yield to the point that it's causing such an economic cost to you that it justifies that treatment intervention. And then you want to make sure, monitor and sample. There's lots of different tools depending on what the insect is. In this case, ALB, I think it's pretty straightforward. If for some folks who are asking, well, how do we know about the black spots on the bottom? I recommend just a hand lens, a simple magnifying glass can help, because the insects themselves are quite small, but very distinct. So I think once you see the lacebug once, you can see the way the wings look on the adults. Pretty soon you'll be able to identify it with no trouble. So then finally, choosing and applying combination of management tactics that work for your system. There's a range of approaches. The foundation are really, we want to start with the things that are low toxicity or no toxicity. For example, cultural practices, So again, looking at maybe resistant cultivars, nutrient management, pruning, and those kinds of things that are going to kind of provide you a foundation of prevention. I don't think there are any physical management approaches for avocado lacebug, such as barriers. But then thinking about biological control, hopefully we do see some increase in options for that. And then looking at the chemical, kind of the more natural or biorational products first, and then the conventional as needed. So cultural control, thinking about things like sanitation, that removing diseased or infested plants, if possible, cleaning equipment and tools, and using clean inputs, crop rotation, trap crops and resistant varieties, as well as proper tree care. So just an example from tomatoes, and hopefully we have some clearer information about which of the cultivars of avocado seem to be more tolerant to the lacebug or less tasty to the lacebug. Again, examples of mechanical or physical control for other but not really practical in avocado. Biological control, so this includes predators, parasitoids, and pathogens potentially. And just a reminder that the use of natural enemies, it reduces pest densities, but it doesn't eliminate the population altogether. So this is, again, a management strategy that's going to bring that equilibrium density down, hopefully below that threshold, so that we can continue to have good avocado production, but know that the pest is going to continue to be there as well. And just a quick reminder, advantages and disadvantages of pesticides. In some cases, we see that they tend to be more effective, but again, depending on spray coverage and so on, especially when we're looking at contact products, which is a real challenge in big trees in particular, there's going to be that trade-off. Also thinking about the disadvantages, non-target risks, for example, pest resistance and so on. And we put cheap here under an advantage with a question mark because, again, depending on the frequency of spray, and we certainly know that here in Hawaii, the products can be quite expensive themselves, in addition to the labor cost. So finally, for IPM, you want to make sure and come back and evaluate the results so you can assess what's working, what's not working, and if you need to make any changes in your management. Just a summary of the benefits here. Hopefully the idea is that it can be an effective control, increase beneficial insects, decrease your risk of pesticide resistance so that the tools that we do have continue to be useful to us in the long run, and then cost effective so that by balancing that kind of cost and benefit assessment for your specific situation, you can see that you're not spending money and time unnecessarily. So with that, I'll say mahalo for your time. I hope it's a helpful framework, and you can open it back up to any questions.
Emily, thank you very much. Thank you. Great presentation. Jensen, if you are still around with us, there is a question about should I be getting rid of all the infected leaves as they drop off from the trees? I have been mulching with them, but is this increasing the infestation? That is kind of clearly related to the ALB.
I mean, once the leaf dies, the pest is gone off the leaf. So the dead leaf is not doing much. The pest is only going to be living on the live leaf until it kills it, and then it's going to move on to the next leaf. So having the dead leaves there are probably not going to be a problem. Once they fall, they might carry some of the eggs and some of the insects with them to the ground. I don't believe that they're very strong flyers. So in my opinion, it's not that huge of a problem because they're not going to live in there once the leaf is dead itself. So that's, if you can get it out, that may minimize your population, but avocados are everywhere. So if your neighbor has infestation on their plants, it's just going to come back to your trees. So I personally don't think it's worth your effort to remove the leaves from the orchard itself.
How about composting, Jensen? What do you think of that?
I mean, yeah, if you can compost it, that's gonna eliminate any of the source of pests coming back into your operation.
Thank you. Thank you. Freddie, what do you think by, what do you mean by a test?
Oh, excuse me. Actually, I apologize. I was just commenting on the last comment, and because from what I was hearing from Jensen, that it's you know, the possibility of the pest still being on the leaf is not 100% that it's gone. So, you know, who knows? Maybe if they were left on the ground, there could be a high percentage of reinfection of the tree. Whereas if you remove them and composted them, there may not be. So I just thought maybe I might do that myself. Sorry.
Well, their whole life cycle is on the tree, so there's no stage of life cycle that's in the ground. So the eggs, the nymphs, and the adults are all on the leaf. So once the leaf dies, there's typically no pest on them when it falls off. They've already moved onto the next leaf. So for the most part, I think all the leaves that have fallen off typically don't have a lot of them on them.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. Appreciate it.
But yeah, that's a good practice for any pest management strategies to compost the leaf material if you have that capability.
Thank you. Thank you, Jensen, for that.
No problem.
Composting is a very good strategy for all that waste because you are not just leaving it for the elements, and it takes usually a longer time for especially leaves and bigger branches to break down. So when you compost them, you are going to shred them and so on, and then give them that, put them in that compost pile with the heat and the biology that will break down these stuff much faster. And then you are going to end up with a stuff that's good for the soil, and that crop and the soil will benefit from it much faster. So it is a good practice, definitely, as mentioned, that it's to compost all these green waste. Guys, is there any other questions?
There's one more. How far do they travel? I mean, my understanding is they're not strong flyers, so they're basically wind carried. So it could be feet to miles that they travel, depending on if it's trade winds or corner winds. I guess that day they can move miles versus a few feet. So it's pretty hard to reduce the exposure because, like I said, there's so much avocado everywhere in Hawaii, from home garden trees to wild trees just growing on farms that are not necessarily managed, but they're harvested from. So I don't think you can necessarily reduce the exposure by distance. They're gonna move and land on trees as they float around in the wind. So I don't think you can plant them in a way to minimize exposure. You can only manage the trees in the area however best you can. Will it be worth putting a tent? Maybe if you have one tree, it might be worth it, but I don't, in my opinion, if you can find varieties that can tolerate the damage and still fruit heavily, that's the best management strategy I think you can do. And right now, I couldn't tell you what that is. I know for a fact that the San Miguel trees at our research station fruit heavily without any pesticide application. It does have damage, it does drop leaves, but in my opinion, from what I've seen over the last 2 years, it fruits the same as it did prior to infestation. So I would say if you can look at trees in your area, and if you see avocado trees that aren't heavily damaged, it's probably because they're more tolerant to the pest itself. So you might want to figure out what variety that is and get some cyan wood from that tree and graft it onto your tree and get rid of whatever you're growing. It might not be something you want to eat, but it'll be there might be avocados to eat. But I couldn't tell you from the hundreds of avocados that we have in Hawaii what's best where at this point. That's going to take years and a lot of grad students to figure that out. I think maybe we can work to putting together a platform that growers and homeowners can add comments to as far as what variety they have in their location and how it's doing. That's something that we could potentially do, make a website to get that information and make that available to the public. I think that might be a good idea moving forward so that you can figure out whose trees are doing well in your area and what variety they're growing. Then that way you might want to make the decision to change your varieties to those varieties. Any other questions?
Hey, Jensen, it's Freddie again, man. Is there any way that we'll be able to get maybe like a PDF or a download for the different types of controls that you use so that we can give them a shot ourselves?
Yeah, so I'll send the PDF to Amjad and then he can send that out to the email list that you registered with.
Wow, man.
Also, this presentation is recorded, so we will be able to share the recording as well. Thank you, everybody.
I think there's one more question. Does the amount of moisture affect population? I don't think so. I mean, I think the drier months and the wetter months, you still see damage. I don't have that quantified though, but it doesn't seem like wetter times of the year or drier times of the year affect it. I think wetter times the trees might be a little bit healthier. It's getting more water. That water is helping with nutrient uptake, so you might have a healthier tree, so the damage might be less. But I don't have that information offhand.
How about temperature?
I don't think we have too severe temperatures in Hawaii that necessarily affect it. Yeah, I don't have that information for you. From what I've seen,
Summer was, sorry, Jensen, keep going.
go ahead. Yeah, in the areas I've seen the damage, the temperature has not affected the damage throughout the year, whether it's summer or winter.
At the Urban Garden Center last summer, it was really hot, and the lace bug was still there.
Yeah, and if you go up to higher elevations, you still see the damage during the winter. So I don't think there's any temperature differences. But that's cool. I think I got a note that USDA ARS in Hilo is looking into that. Temperature and moisture effects on population in West Hawaii. So that information might be available soon to answer those questions. Yeah, typically the Admire application, you put in the fertilizer. I don't know if it necessarily helps with the uptake, but just the addition of the irrigation itself helps with uptake of the product, especially if you're not necessarily irrigating your trees. I think that's all I have.
Thank you very much, Jensen. Thank you very much, Emily. Great presentation. Thank you, everybody who joined us. Again, yeah, we will have the recording and also we'll have the PDF file of the presentations. Thank you very much again, and we will send you also an evaluation for this event. You have a nice evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you for everybody participating.
Thank you so much.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Grant.
Hui ho, thank you.
Thank you.
Mahalo. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mahalo.
Same to you. Thank you very much.
I went in December and they ran out of so nutrient suggested Wrangler. And I think it's pretty much the same.
Yeah, it's almost exactly the same. I think the concentration is the only difference.
It's
Yeah.
4 and 4.6. It's really small difference in a way.
Yes.
Yeah, the active ingredient, one is 4, one is 4.6.
If you're already using the max for the drench and you still see a lot of those on the leaves, then what do you do? Seems like it's not, should I wait a month or two? I mean, it's over a month now. It seems like there's still these bugs underneath the leaf.
That's a good question. You should have seen it within a month. The